food, and especially staples. Staples is really obviously what we need to worry about. But yeah, that's what I think, Dave. I think food is definitely something we have to look at more closely.
With all the floods, let's just say across the planet, with all the natural disasters, I thought there would be more of a lack of food. Remember the Great World Grain Belt in Ukraine? Don't hear that anymore. Or maybe that's only affecting Africa. In Australia we produce a lot of food, but most of those the farmlands have been underwater, and crop losses have been extensive. But we haven't seen the result of those, or the lack of harvest. In some places, like I think blueberries or something, we had the biggest harvest we've ever had of blueberries. I didn't think that was going to be a thing.
Oh, there's a glut. I mean, you go to the supermarket, there's massive, and there's strawberries too, actually.
Yeah, right. But look, these are the things that I think of. I can't help it. I just every day, when I stare into the pantry, I just think about what I'm going to miss. Looking at the foods that I've got in my pantry, I think, what could I make? What could we do ourselves? And we've actually gotten into home canning, but in dehydrated canning, which is really cool. So I think I've told everyone about dehydrating marshmallows. It just makes them rock hard. That doesn't. You think they're going to shrink and disappear to nothing, but no, they stay their shape. They hold their shape, but they just go to hard lollies rather, like chalk. They turn to chalk. Where we've done recently a bunch of green-leafed herbs, because we had thyme and basil, and just cut it up, dehydrated it, and that's what you end up in the sprinkle jar that you get from the supermarket. That's just dehydrated. That's all that is. So we did carrot the other day. That turned out a treat. So the equivalency of, like, I think they're called mason jars. I forget how many ounces it is, 10 ounce or 20 ounce jars or whatever. They're really good. We bought a whole bunch of lids, and getting through that, all those little desiccant pellets in the plastic, for some good storage, and away we go. So I'm seriously thinking about what we can do for heirloom foods that the seeds can be propagated. I'm in that point in my life right now with the world events, and if unless they make it a fine, like it's a finable. Okay, Mackie, if there's a finable offence of collecting or harvesting rainwater in California, that's tragic. I mean, why? Why would you do that? In Australia, we've been through such a large drought that it became mandatory to provide local water storage. But that water storage is only to be used for washing machine and toilet flushing. But still, you know what? We're still saving water. We save the water by keeping the beautiful, clean water that's been prepared by the city for drinking, and of course for the dishwasher, crazy, and for washing up, it's even crazier, and for cleaning the car, crazy, right? The only thing is drinking water. If there was a way to only use this city water for drinking water, so showering as well, and baths, whatever, all of that is handled by the city water. And I'm really surprised that it's not mandated that you can only have drinking water, but rather you have to use the the roof, the harvested water, rainwater for all of those other tasks. That would make total sense. Even though there's people in farms really close to me who don't have town water, and they either have bore water from a drill bore, or they use their harvested rainwater as their drinking water, or all the water in the house. And so it's not illegal for them to drink that water, but it is for me. Isn't that bizarre? So, we're only one step away from California, but if California's drought was so bad that they decided to mandate that you needed to harvest rainwater, but you could only use it for flushing the toilet and your washing machine, that would be perfectly legitimate. I believe that, because that would get California at least to where we are. We had two droughts about a decade each, and in between it rained significantly, and it's doing the same kind of rain thing at the moment where I live. And it's been, everything outside only had about 2 to 3 weeks in total since Christmas of actually being dry, and otherwise all totally wet. In fact, one of the steel foundations of my house near my front stairs, it was never wet. It was never dry, and so it's got to have some attention in the next year, I think, because the rust on the ground plate's pretty bad. But we've seen, I think, in the last 9 previous months before Christmas, we'd seen the most rain we'd ever had. We exceeded, maybe I think tripled or something, the yearly totals, and it was never dry. Now, an ability which I'm not sure if you know, like you just have a piece of steel outside. These were even zinc. What are they called? Anodized? No, the other one. Oh, someone type in the chat room for me. When you have a zinc treated galvanized, right? So these were even galvanized steel, and they just couldn't deal with the submersion, right? Because the water was just awful. So you've got to think about this. There's a limit to how quickly something can deteriorate, and it's based on it being dry for the most part. But when something never gets an opportunity to dry out, that's when trouble begins. Now, I think Meki has decided to restart his machine because he was having some grief. Maybe it's his internet. Maybe it's his machine. Who knows? But he'll be back shortly. So yeah, this is what I'm thinking, right? So we have currency that will evaporate if you don't use it in a digital, great reset world. And I believe that's the case. I believe that's what they're going to do. I don't believe you're going to be able to save it. So if you pooled your resources with your friends and like shared housing and you're paying rent, but because there's more of you, you can afford to save more of your digital currency. But are you going to spend more of your digital currency? Well, you would if it had an expiration date on it. So say every time they paid you an amount that it had a 1 month limit of existence and then it just vanished. Then for every month, whatever you had to basically spend it all. Otherwise it'd be zero in the kitty. And the next month, if you had any remainder, say you were paid fortnightly, but each payment lasted for 1 month, there'd be a 2-week cut over between that you still had an active balance. I think that's probably as cool as it would get. Probably that, and well, let's say we don't have a war. Let's say there's no main impactor gonna devastate everything. The pliable resource of humanity is just there to maintain the super wealthy. And of course, if we get to a point where there's digital currency and this has all been implemented and the capitalist society that we live in now is a long forgotten memory. What's next? What is, if that's only there to sustain a level of frontline person in some regard, to be able to keep the barrier between the working poor and the ultra wealthy. As soon as there was no longer resources, like no longer food, no longer, fresh water, like Meki mentioned, if there was a time when that wasn't ever available, then it's even the playing field. And this doesn't matter how much money you've got, you're never going to buy something that just isn't there. So I think to maintain that gap, or let's call it the moat, to make sure that the moat is always in place, you must always allow the working poor, the servitude, right, to have enough to not complain, just enough to be entertained, and to be fed and housed. If you have those three things, then there's not going to be any revolt, even if it's tough, even if resources are tight and there isn't enough food. As long as there is food, then you're still good to go. And one of the things that I think is going to be the challenge is how is that sustained over generations? I mean, what would the point be of living in that kind of servitude? Yeah? I don't understand what your motive would be to open your eyes every day, to get up, to, if you're limited in where you can go and what you can do, and if the only money is basically going to be vacuumed out of your pocket for food, for rent, or the money is, if you don't own a place and you're not on a living wage because they've taken your house to then fund you the rest of your life, then what happens at the end of yours and the beginning of your child's life, where they don't have any asset of a living wage, right, for perpetuity? What does that mean for them? They just go, basically, it's just like being on unemployment. There's only a certain level of money. Now, they do say that the idea would be that if you're on equivalent of a living wage, whatever it means, or however it's described in your language, that you would then be able to work and earn some more money, is how I've heard it described. But the place that you worked at would take into account the living wage that you already earn, being able to then pay you less as just a top up or above. So if I used real numbers, say you earned from the government into your account per month, just to make the numbers nice and easy, let's say it was 12,000, and you don't have to pay a mortgage, and maybe you've got to pay rent, I don't know. So let's just say $1,000 a month, but if you wanted to get a job for 14,000, you'd only be earning 2,000 extra, right? So that company would only have to pay you that much. I think that's the way it's going to go. I don't think, if you go to get a job for $100,000, that you would get an extra $100,000 on top of your 12,000. I think that company would drop it by 12,000 and give you, what's that, 88,000, right? I think that's the way it's more than likely going to operate. And you'd be extremely wealthy, right? If that was the case, if people on 12,000 could live and you had 100, then there you go, right? I think that would keep the servitude, the desire to want to work to earn more, or maybe not, right? Maybe there's a bare minimum of like tiny houses with food boxes, and if you wanted to share with someone in a tiny house, then you could pool that money together and maybe, do something else. But you've got to still think about the constraints. So you can't travel anywhere or do anything. So I've got to say, what's the point, right? What is it that we're going to be able to do after the Great Reset has finalized all of its plans? Because at the moment, my father lives 800 k's away, and I'd like to go and see him, but does that mean that I would get a special dispensation to be able to make that journey, which I've done more than once a year, right, for the last 25 years? Does that mean that can happen? I don't know. I'm just really concerned. So the best kind of if they're sorry, I'm going to backtrack. To be able to travel a certain distance, and if their rules are what they want, which they are, under their own guise of the Great Reset, then they probably force you to travel in an electric vehicle. I would argue that an EV uses more carbon or creates more carbon than a hybrid vehicle, where the hybrid fuel, rather than the electricity used in that vehicle, where you don't charge it, it's a non-rechargeable car. I think that if you ran E85, then 85% of the fuel it burns is recyclable. At least that keeps us at a certain very small incremental level. I think that would be the way they should have done it in the first place, and just done hybrids everywhere. I'm not sure about the stats, but vehicle fires for EVs that are made with on the cheap are super high. But we don't have a delete button for the noises that we make. So if the car itself was a hybrid and you were using only 15% of the fuel in there to get around, that was non-renewable or net new carbon, then I think that would probably be the best way to do it. Otherwise, you have an electric car engine motor, but you have some kind of fuel to just generate electricity to drive it around. And it sort of like a diesel train is a diesel generator driving equivalent of an alternator, creating the power for the electric motor. That's all that is. I can see that happening. Right? Let's see what happens. Let's see what's declared next. But for whatever changes are occurring, any new policies that you hear about, please let me know. If you go to shinysideout.net, you should see. Was it .net? Not .net. I forget what it is now. I had a pork chop go and buy shinysideout.com, and it meant that I couldn't buy my one. Right? And then they wanted to charge me some crazy numbers. I ended up buying .com.au and .net, I think. Yeah, that's right. So you can make contact with Mecky and I on I think it's the About Us page. No, Contact Us page on Shiny Side Out. If you do that, we get emailed. All right. And I've even provided an email address that you can just click on, and opens up in your own email client and send that. Otherwise, you can send. There's a form. A form is good. Right? Do that. It's all I think about these days. I wish I had, I wish I had things that I could examine but about the Great Reset, but I don't. Their pamphlet is very thin. It's all motherhood statements, and there's very little fact in there. But from an observational perspective, I think we're really getting the picture. I wanted to say that another Kennedy is attempting to run, who has a larger population. The popular vote within the Democrats, and would spill Joe Biden, who wants to run as well. He's going to announce, I think, next week, so look for the news for that. What surprises me about him running again is his cognitive ability, as the decline is exponential, usually. We've already seen the beginnings of his decline, and he's nowhere near the person that ran today. Right? Today he's nowhere near that. So if this is a sharp decline, then there you go. There's evidence out of the Twitter files that the three-letter agencies in America were cooperating to support the left only by bringing the right down. And while they claimed that they weren't, that the whole reason they held back Hunter Biden's laptop information was because that would meddle in the elections. But what they actually did was still meddle in the elections. According to the Twitter files, findings so far in the hearings that are going on, it's a tragedy that this is now coming to light. The other obvious statements, which I'd already seen a documentary on in the past, when CIA or FBI were putting people in positions still as a paid operative from their three-letter agency into newspapers, into editor roles, so that they could ensure that the final output that went to print had only stories that were approved by the government. Now, they did that on the secret. No one really knew who they were, these people, but they were in the roles in there, and they ensured that two things: negative press didn't occur against the government, and number two, supportive. So negative press is one thing. No press is good, but positive statements were there for in support of those that they wished. So the right messaging got out. But this wasn't just about government or anti-sitting government. This was about bending the nation, forming the nation's opinions on things, important matters, which were in favour of the government's future choice. So if you were hit out of the blue with something that was against what you thought, then you would say no. But if you'd been coerced by the media into taking the side of this impending, get hit in the side by it kind of news, in an alternate universe, you'd be able to actually say yes. So if I did two things, if I said to you, is war good? Very few people, maybe 15, 10% of people, would say yes. But I could get more than 70% across the line to say, yes, war is good, if I led in with a conversation about how dictators have been dethroned using the military, and that saved, women and children. It changed, voting laws or laws within those dictatorships. It freed up trade, and it did all these things, bettering the entire planet. Sure, I'm not going to say whether they're true or not, but if I entered with those statements, and one of those would have been the Iraq War, while the coals were still hot, and before we realized the whole thing was done on lies, back then there was this kind of, staunch opposition to a country that had just bombed the US, right? So easily you could say that war was a good thing, but that's because you had the lead up. Now, if these people in these positions within the media back then, both TV and like print TV media, could sway you, even movies, by the way, even movies had people, operatives working within them. So if you could sway the people and connect them to something emotionally, and when that came up, when whatever the choice was came up, then people would vote in favor of your idea. That's really interesting. So to discover that they were in social media, oh my goodness. Why would you think they never were? Right? If we already knew they were in the print media and the broadcast media, then why would it be such a shock to discover they were already into social media? And they have programs in there which steer us as individuals now. They've got enough computing power, not individuals doing it, but they've got enough computing power to determine your social makeup, your psychological profile, how you would decide or you would answer a specific question, even though you've not been posed with the question. And that way they can steer you through social media, through the posts that turn up in your news feed, some of which aren't real. They didn't come from the person that said they came from. And that really surprised me. It really changed the way I thought about social media. When I messaged a friend of mine who'd posted something and I saw it, and they claimed they'd never posted anything like it. We looked at their news feed and it wasn't there, but there it was showing up as them sending it to me. And it was one of those things that was you could connect to it emotionally, and then you could form an opinion, and you could decide in a particular way. It's one of those steering devices. So now it's about which story's headline is worded in such a way as to either be just upward and blunt, it could sway you because of the terminology used, or the wording that might seem just a little edgy, maybe edged away from you, but you're curious and you want to read the story, but then you discover the story is in fact either totally with the heading or against the heading. You've got to think, if you've read a story like that, you know what they're doing. You know what the goal is. So Mecki and I had a famous, furious argument with a friend who was in media who said none of this was true. And that was funny. We cited examples, and then they cited an example from only reading the heading. But the content of the story that they said to us supported their idea was totally false. The story was against the topic, the heading. The heading was pro his thought, but the story was against it. So when we pointed that out, that was when he defriended both of us. And I laugh because if you don't read the story and get the full understanding, that what you've just learnt is inherited opinion, someone else's opinion. And when you dig deep and you try and find out, because this is what I do, I can't help it. I want to know when someone has an opinion and it seems a bit heartfelt. So, well, send me the link. Send me some links and let me have a little read about it, because I'd like to know you more of your side. And you immediately get angry and defensive and combatant. They want to they want to fight me. But didn't you know this? Well, no, I'd like to know. That'd be great. Send me some links and I'll read them and I'll get back to you. So then I'll also look at not just the pro links, but the anti links, whatever both sides of the story is from both sides of the media, and I'll find the truth in between. And that's the only thing that I'll adopt. I don't adopt the sentiment that's attached to these pieces because they're slant. I know I've talked about it with Meki, who's I think rebooting his machine still. Hopefully he's back on the other side of the other hour. But anyway, you find out that a media outlet, let's say Fox and CNN, you find out that their audience is either right or left, respectively, and they won't publish the opposite because they start to lose audience. And that means they're only pandering to their own audience, which is fair. I get it. But long are the days, oh, how I remember those, are the days when the media was not funded. The news outlets weren't funded. They were just cross-funded from other shows on the same network, and they just put out the news as it was with real journalism, without a slant, with non-biased. It sounds like unicorns, but that's the way it used to be. Anyway, we've come to the end of the first hour. I only had about half of this recorded on YouTube. So anyway, now that I've got it all sorted, we'll catch you on the other side of the break. For the Nazis, the Third Reich, and the occult.